All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Rachel Wallner, and I am helping present this on behalf of the Farmington Community Library. Thank you for joining this evening. I hope that this presentation will be very helpful. I will try to cover a lot, but of course, when it comes to something as common and as prevalent as worry, there's just so much to discuss. So we'll do our best. Um, I have to learn how to change my slides now. Oh, I don't know how. Well, there we go. Sorry. So a little bit about myself. I'm a social worker. I work for the Beaumont Health Center, specifically the one at Romulus High School. We provide medical and mental health services to youth ages 10 to 21 in Wayne County. Beaumont currently has seven currently teen health centers and five mental health only sites in the area, with more being added every single year. I mean, we're literally hiring for more sites as we speak because there just keeps, we get more opportunities and more funding to open these sites. So these sites are made to provide uh, mental health and medical services to kids who may not have access otherwise. So that's why we're located in the schools. We don't have to worry about transportation or other issues. We're grant funded, so we're allowed to accept any insurance, including Medicaid. We take uninsured. We don't charge copays to families. We can also assist with Medicaid enrollment. We're just able to provide a lot of services. So typically with my job, I'm doing therapy with students at the high school, so I can pull them out of class as needed and also deal with some crisis situations as they come up. And then I also work with other youth in the area who either do telehealth or their parents bring them in. Um, we try to just make sure that there's a large population of people who can't necessarily access these services without us. So that's what we do. Put the website there. This presentation or the PowerPoint will be available later, and you can look up more of that on your own. So today's agenda, I will try to cover what does anxiety look like in children? When do I seek help for my child? And how do I help my child? So obviously there's a lot to each of those components, and I'll do my best to cover what we can tonight. So first of all, anxiety, what is it, right? So some stress or worry is beneficial. It pushes us to take action, it focuses us, gives us energy, motivation, right? A deadline at work can be a very useful thing because we have that thought of, I need to put some other stuff aside and actually deal with this right now. Um, Anxiety is a normal stress response. We're all going to feel it at times. That's okay. But persistent anxiety is going to impact our body and our mind in a lot of negative ways. We've all heard a lot about how stress can cause physical health problems. We also know that it can just be very wearing over time. So while it can be useful, it also needs to be managed well, right? And it can be out of control. So common worries for kids or youth, school performance, right? School is their job. It's what they do 5 days a week. Friendships or bullying, family, health of the family, the future, a response to a traumatic event that they may have gone through, or maybe even seen something on the news or heard about something, right? It's very common for kids to be hearing about all kinds of stuff today. And then whatever they see you worrying about, right? Because kids are in tune with their parents, right? They're looking to their parents for guidance. And so if they see you stressing about something, oftentimes they kind of pick up that stress too. Now, this doesn't mean you can never show your kids that you're worrying. I think instead, what it means is that we need to model what good worrying looks like, what good stress management looks like. Now, this is going to depend on the age of your child, right? A conversation with a 15-year-old is very different than a conversation with a 5-year-old, right? About what they need to know, about what details they need to have, or how you would kind of explain things to them. But, for example, you might go to your third grader and say, I'm worried about your grades. I know it's harder to catch up from behind than it is to just stay on top of things. So let's think of some things that we could do to try to help you catch up, right? So you're pointing out the problem, but then you're also saying, hey, let's look at solutions, right? We're not just going to stay with the problem. Or maybe it's you know, I worry about grandma being sick too. I don't like to see her like this. why don't we say a prayer for her? Or why don't we come up with something that would cheer her up? Maybe we could draw her a picture or give her a call. So again, you're acknowledging the problem that's there, but then trying to help them think about, well, then how do I respond to it in a good way, right? So, what does it look like in kids? Because sometimes it looks a little different than adults. It can look like perfectionism. They get hyper focused. It has to be perfect, or it just wasn't good enough. It can be inattention. They can't stay on task. So sometimes it kind of looks like ADHD. Um, I would say this about ADHD: if ADHD suddenly pops up in your child's life, it's not ADHD, it's something else. That's something they've had consistently throughout their life. That's more something that might be ADHD. They may seem lazy or unmotivated because I skipped avoiding things. This goes along with avoiding things. So they may avoid things, they may withdraw from other people, right? I don't like to do things that make me anxious. That's just normal, right? Within the same line, they may seem lazy or unmotivated. That might kind of be their way of pulling back, is to just not care, or, to suddenly lose interest in things that they always liked. They could be very easily embarrassed. They could be clingy. They might lash out at others. Um, and then really common are physical symptoms. So it happens to adults, but especially happens to kids where they don't necessarily verbalize stuff as much. It manifests more in their body. Stomach aches, super common for anxiety. Headaches, sweating, it's hard to breathe, their heart rate's fast. They may know it's anxiety related, or they may have no idea. It might to them just seem like, I just have a stomach ache, and they're not connecting it to something that they're upset about. So I'm just skimming the surface on types of anxiety, right? And I'll go into more about, if you have a lot of concerns, how to get help to really get things diagnosed, right? But here are just a few of the common types we see with kids. So separation anxiety, we're all pretty familiar with hearing that term, right? It's focused on separation from loved ones. Specific phobia, that's one type of thing that really gets to them. They're really scared of dogs or heights or storms, or kind of a specific situation. So if that situation's not present, they don't seem to have a problem with things. But when that shows up, all bets are off. They are irrationally upset. Social anxiety. Now, this one's a little bit tricky because it needs to be peer focused. Remember, it is normal for a 7-year-old to be shy around adults, right? I mean, some 7-year-olds aren't, but that's kind of a common reaction. This is more, you're seeing a level of fear of rejection or embarrassment with their peers. And then generalized anxiety, which is probably one that we're most kind of familiar with lately, is just people concerned most days for a whole variety of situations. And it's very difficult for them to control worrying. So, in the morning, they're worried about this. In the afternoon, they're worried about that. In the evening, they're worried about that. Doesn't matter what comes up. It kind of, they always seem to have a way to worry about it, right? So it's not diagnosable until it causes significant impairment or distress over a period of time. Usually that time frame is about 6 months and is out of proportion to the situation. So think about like the degree of impact over time, right? So, I mean, it's one thing to be scared of a big barking, snarling dog, even if it's behind a fence, right? The kid gets scared, okay, but the child who so much as hears a dog bark when they're outside and has to run inside and is terrified, and okay, that's a level there where we're saying it's kind of impairing them, right? They can't play outside anymore because they keep hearing dogs barking and they're terrified of dogs coming to attack them, you know um or they're afraid of a tornado but the sun's shining outside. They just won't go outside anymore because what about tornadoes? It's like, well, this is causing impairment. Separation anxiety. They can't go to school, or they won't go stay at their friend's house anymore, or, it's just stopping them from doing some of those normal activities. So now here's the thing. Anxiety is on a major scale, right? So a child may fall in a range where it's maybe not diagnosable, but we still say they need some help with it, or we recognize that it's not good for them right now, or they're lacking some coping skills. So it doesn't mean that they have to be falling into the DSM-5, category of anxiety before we say we'll get help, right? We just know with anything, right? If we see a kid struggling, we say, okay, let's look at what would be useful for them. Um, Also, with anxiety, you want to make sure it's not explained by something else a little better. So, some examples could be um, PTSD, which technically is an anxiety disorder, but it's very specific, to a traumatic event. Prolonged grief, right? That could cause clingingness. That could cause, some stuff like that. Depression, oppositional defiant disorder, or OCD, which again, OCD technically is an anxiety disorder, but it's a different variety, right? So you want to kind of rule out some of that stuff where if you're saying, I notice they're anxious or have these behaviors, but then maybe the problem is a little more specific to something else. So when do we get help, right? So are they being really unrealistic? Right? So are they worried about stuff that you're just looking at the situation and like, I don't even know where that's coming from? You know, is it really out of proportion? So you were 10 minutes late picking up your kid from school and they thought you died. Like that, it's one thing to be, oh, mom's 10 minutes late. I wonder, where is she at? Or, but it's another thing to be absolutely hysterical over something like that. Right. It consistent, right? You're seeing it kind of pop up over and over again. It's not a bad day or it's not, they've been kind of stressed out about some other stuff. And so, yeah, something comes up or they're a little more, need a little more reassurance than normal. So along with that consistent, and you're seeing it throughout similar circumstances, right? If they really have a phobia of dogs, then probably most dogs are going to set them off, you know. Um, if there's that separation anxiety, it's probably going to come up in most situations. There could be some exceptions, right? For some reason, it could be like, but I don't mind going to Billy's house because Billy's house feels like family. So it seems the same. But overall, you see it kind of across the board. Long lasting, right? Greater than 6 months, that's kind of a catch-all amount of time. But you see it consistently. It's not so much just a short little phase that a kid is going through. It's unwanted and uncontrollable. Seems like they don't have any ability to deal with it. It's disruptive and it causes impairment to functioning. So that kind of goes back to what I was talking about before. So this could be school performance is majorly impacted, or they can't do those activities that they used to do, or can't seem to join activities that most kids their age would want to join. You notice maybe it's hurting their social skills. Anxiety really pushes us away from dealing with other people. And so we lose out on some of that development, right? So you're seeing that it seems like the worry is causing these other issues. And then anytime, of course, that a health professional or a mental health professional says, I really think your child could use some assistance or maybe could use an assessment, that's always right, a marker of, okay, let me at least talk to somebody about it, right? Because for some reason, this person is seeing some things that's making them think my child needs some help. So could be a school counselor, could be their doctor. Somebody just says, maybe have an evaluation or maybe have this looked at. So here's my little therapy 101 course, because it can be very intimidating to try to look for professional help for your child, right? So number one is feel free to interview your therapist. To say, be nice to us, like we're human, but also ask questions, right? You want to know what they're like. You want to know what they're going to try. You want to know what they think about the situation, right? That's all really appropriate. Ask about their methods. And they should be able to mostly explain it to you, right? So I'll go in a little more depth about CBT in a moment, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is sort of the gold standard for dealing with anxiety. And then also exposure therapy. You've probably heard of that in some, maybe seen some like stereotypical examples of that. But those two things are very well known. There are many, many, many great methods. It does not mean if they don't bring up those words that you pounce on that and say, you're a terrible therapist, you don't know what you're doing. Also, CBT has been branched off into so many different varieties or components of it have been used in really good methods. So you could bring up CBT and they might say, actually, we use that, but here's what else we do, or show other components of it. But, you can research what they say, right? Say, okay, how do you spell that? Or what is that? Or give me a little explanation. Do a little homework on your own. Like that's okay, right? There, no, just with any professional, right? Yes, you want to trust what they do, but then it's okay to look at it and see if it seems like it's going to be a good fit for your family. Um, and then work with the therapist, right? So ask about the therapy homework. Ask what your child's learning, figure out how you can help implement that at home, especially with younger kids, right? We don't expect them to go talk to someone for 45 minutes and then once a week and that's just going to solve it, right? They got to be working on things at home and you're going to be the main person that's going to help them do all of that, right? So, with that, think of yourself as an active participant and it's very possible that family therapy will be a part of it too, whether that's a 10-15 minute check-in at the end of each session where the therapist kind of goes over what they learned and what the kid's going to be working on, or it could be specific sessions set aside to work on just communicating or problem solving different things. But you want to be an active participant. Now, on the flip side of that, you want to give your kids some privacy too. So it's their therapist, right? And they should have the ability to go and talk to their therapist and maybe have some conversations that you don't know about or you don't know all the details to. Now, your therapist is bound by law that if there's a safety concern, they are reporting it. They cannot keep those things quiet. But maybe you had a fight with your kid and your kid wants to talk about it with the therapist and process, but they're also a little nervous well, what if what I say to you gets back and mom or dad is mad? And it's just better for your child if they know that my conversation with my therapist is private. We'll talk with mom or dad about what I'm learning. If there's stuff that we need to communicate, we're going to work on that all together. But, a therapist is not there to pick your child's brain and then tell you everything that's in there. And I don't think parents ever do this intentionally, but I've seen it sometimes where a parent just they want to know what's going on with their kids, so they're kind of pushing the therapist to give them all that insight. And that therapist is going to want to help them understand their child better, but they're going to want to do it in a way that helps the parent and child connect, because we as therapists are trying to work ourselves out of a job. We are not trying to be there forever. You have a lifelong relationship with your child. We don't. So our ultimate goal is that the two of you are going to be able to have those conversations, even if it has to start with, a third person there at the time. Okay, cognitive behavioral therapy. I will try to give a useful explanation. So this is a typical way of addressing anxiety for people. And this is for kids and adults. It's just obviously going to look a little different depending on the age. So you see this triangle here, you've got thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And the general idea is that these are all interconnected, that my thoughts often drive my feelings, which often drive my behaviors, which is why you can look at two people in the same situation and one person is freaking out and the other person seems just like they're fine. They've got it under control. That one person, their thoughts are throwing them for a loop and the other person is keeping themselves calm, right? They're thinking about it in a very different way. So, first on this is identifying some of those distressing thoughts. This is harder than it sounds because a lot of times we don't necessarily know what's upsetting us most. And so it can take a little time, especially for a kid who's more you know, more feeling things and more doing things than they are necessarily thinking through what their thoughts are and verbalizing it. Excuse me. So try to help them identify what are these thoughts that are most distressing to them. Then we try to help them identify feelings that are connected to the thoughts. So a little more nuanced than just it made me scared. Okay, let's kind of draw that out. Maybe there was some embarrassment with it too. Maybe, there were some other things, but helping kids identify those feelings. Um, Then we're going to look at those thoughts and say, are they true and are they helpful? So, oftentimes, what you find with those high anxiety producing thoughts are that they are maybe a little bit true, but like blowing things out of proportion, and generally not helpful at all. So, a lot of all or nothing thinking. I failed one test, I am a failure. You know, um, if I lost one game, I'm terrible at the sport and I shouldn't even play, right? Um, Sort of that extremes, right? They jump to worst case scenario, right? If I read aloud in class, I'm going to mess up and everybody's going to laugh at me and nobody's going to want to be my friend, right? Or just really unrealistic too, right? So, if we get in the car right now, we're going to get in a car accident and we're all going to die, So just, I kind of use sometimes the example of like if someone's afraid of dying and their thought is, I'm going to die, that is technically a true thought, right? Like we are all going to die. However, unless they're in a very bad situation in that moment, in which case thinking, I'm going to die and I need to get out of this situation is perfectly appropriate and will actually keep them safe, then that same thought in a not real threatening situation is probably going to lead them to do something that is not going to be very good. So they're in a meeting and they're supposed to present next, and their thought is, I'm going to die, and they get up and leave. Well, that's bad for their job, right? Which is very different than recognizing, the truth of what's happening, right? So we're working on modifying those thoughts to be true and to be helpful. And I'm simplifying all of this, to try to give you a general idea, but that's the basic of it. And then when you're improving your thoughts, your emotions will improve with it, and then your behaviors improve, right? And then another component of CBT, which is very important, is working on coping skills because we also do just need to address the feelings sometimes, right? We can't always start in the head. We also need to understand that if I learn how to calm my body, here's the thing, if my heart's beating really fast and I'm breathing really hard, it often pushes my brain into scarier thoughts. If I control my breathing and then my heart rate comes down and my body calms, oftentimes my mind calms with it. So I don't always have to just attack the thought side. Sometimes I'm managing the feeling side, but they're going to interact and they're going to help me calm down. And then better thoughts and feelings lead to better choices, which lead to better thoughts and feelings, right? More confidence, more ability to step back and do what I need to do instead of just reacting maybe blindly. Okay, what about medication? Let me see if I don't know if that's in the video or not. Okay, big question, right? So always have an experienced medical professional who understands psychotropic medication for children. If you're going to have your child assessed for medication, make sure that it's someone who understands those nuances. So medications work differently in adults and children. Obviously, the dosing is different, but more than the dosing, the way that it interacts in their bodies is different. So a doctor may prescribe a medication for a child that you would Google it and look it up and be like, that's not what that's for. Well, in adults, it may be used primarily for this, but in kids, it might be used differently. So you just want to make sure it may be their primary doctor. Their primary doctor may have a lot of knowledge and just confidence in dealing with certain medications. It may be a psychiatrist, right? It may be a specialist. I know there are a lot of primary doctors who will say, I'll start this and we'll look at it. And if it's going well, that's great. And if we don't see it going well, then I'm going to refer you out to someone who's more specialized with it. So it just depends on the doctor. Ask about side effects, right? What's normal? What's expected? What problem? When do we say we need to be calling somebody because this is indicating that things are not okay, or we need to stop the medication at that point and reevaluate? Um, if they're using medication, always include therapy as well. Studies consistently show that medication with therapy is much more effective than medication alone. And remember, if we're willing to try the medication route, we need to be willing to try the therapy route too, right? And then there are no magic pills. But what we're trying to do is give enough relief to allow the child to work on root issues if the problem is that severe. So, in the same way, if I really mess up my knee, my doctor may give me pain meds to help me get through physical therapy, right? The idea is not that these pain meds are going to make my knee feel wonderful. It's, can I give you enough to get you so that you can do the things that you need to do to work on healing, right? For some kids it is longer term, for other kids it's a shorter term process, right? And then never neglect good sleep, routine activity, exercise. These things are shown to sometimes be just as effective as medication. And even if your child needs medication, these will absolutely be helpful when they're on it. And of course, anytime, right? We all know better sleep, better exercise. Our body produces these chemicals that are very helpful. And so don't neglect those things too, right? All right. Now, what about non-professional help, right? You're at home, you want to just help out your kid, whether because they are in therapy or they're maybe, they're not that level and you're saying, "Okay, let's try some stuff at home first." So, back to those good routines, right? Good sleep, healthy eating, being active, get them outside of the house. Even when it's winter time. I know we kind of like we hole up in the winter time, but we need sunshine. If it is not horrible outside, even if it's 15 minutes, go out with them, right? Or go out with them for 15 minutes and then you leave them out there and you go in and make dinner or whatever. You'll get a pickup from it too. But we need that. We need that fresh air. We need that stimulation. We sit inside all day. We need to get out. You can offer your child gentle observations. You don't want to be, a broken record or nagging, but it can be really helpful for your child for you to help them recognize things. So I've put a few examples here. I notice you're biting your nails. Are you feeling stressed about something? Let's talk about it, right? So I'm observing a behavior you're doing. It's tipping me off that you're a little stressed. The kid might not even recognize it yet, right? Well, let's talk about it. Let's do something about it, right? Or you seem to get stomach aches on mornings you have spelling tests. Let's practice some relaxation stuff and see if it helps, right? So pointing out, I see this connection here, stomach aches, spelling tests, right? Like maybe we need some extra practice, that's okay, but maybe we also just need to calm some things down and, to help you feel a little better instead of just staying home from school, right? Practicing social skills, as I mentioned before. So, and this is one where COVID has not helped us, right? We are all well aware, but especially for our young kids, having the masks on, it's taken away a lot of the facial expression that we're used to having. We've also just been telling kids, don't don't interact with people, right? Or stay distanced. You can't go to your friend's house, right? All those things that they're normally using to develop social skills have been pulled back a little bit. So working on eye contact. Are you looking at someone's face when they're talking or are you looking at their shoes? You miss so much communication when you're looking at their shoes, right? Speaking up. Do they know to just, you know, talk a little louder or say what they need to say? Do they know how to be polite but also assertive, right? These are skills that just need to be learned. But for a child with anxiety, they usually pull back from that stuff and it really intimidates them. And so they have a much harder time. And sometimes they just fall behind developmentally because they're not practicing it, right? So a kid may say, "Nobody ever talks to me in the lunchroom." And you might find out that this kid goes to the lunchroom and sits in the corner and puts their headphones in and looks at their phone like this for the whole lunch hour. Well, yeah, nobody talks to you, right? And they're more comfortable this way, right? But they have to work on practicing and opening up and engaging in conversations with kids, right? So organized activities, dance, martial arts, sports, those are really great for this because it causes social interactions, right? But it also gives them a little bit of structure. It's not just go play with those kids over there. It's okay, the five of you are working on this together right now. And so that can often help them develop some of those skills and then also just boost their confidence a little bit, right? If they're doing something that they enjoy. Again, back to that anxiety, it may push them to be like, if I'm not the best, then I shouldn't do it. And so this is also good practice if they are not the best of just being like, can you enjoy it? Can you have fun? Do you like hanging out with your friends, even if your team always loses? Like, is that okay? Can that just be okay? kind of practicing for later on in life when you do not win everything and you don't do the best at everything. And that's all right. Practice problem solving skills. So, does your kid know how to identify what the problem is? Do they know how to think of a couple solutions? Do they know how to pick one, try it, and then evaluate if it went well or not? This is huge, right? Because problems always come up and problems cause us anxiety, right? But if I actually know how to step back and come up with some concrete ways to address it, I'm much better off. And I can start to actually find solutions instead of just getting lost in the emotions of it, right? Google stuff. I know the websites, you can find the craziest things, right? But there are so many great websites. I put some on at the end of this presentation just to kind of get you started. A lot of them have parent sections and kids sections. They've got stuff for both. They've got really great ideas of things that you can be doing at home or things to practice out in public or just things to talk about with your kids. Look for legitimate organizations, look for mental health professionals. Look, when you go on a website, like look for clues that this is reputable and probably a good thing. But there are so many resources out there. In the same way, YouTube. So YouTube is full of instructionals for kids on relaxation techniques and ways to reduce anxiety. The caveat is look at those videos first on your own or watch them with your child, right? Because it's YouTube and there's great content and there's really inappropriate content, or maybe even just, lesser quality, right? So be looking through that stuff with your kids or look up some ideas on your own and have them maybe find some things that kind of help them, right? We don't want them to sit there and stare at the computer the whole time. But, maybe we can do this breathing video together. And maybe it just helps us learn how to breathe. And then when we're out in public somewhere, we're going to practice it together without the video because we've been practicing it with the video. Um, Celebrate successes, even small ones. Again, that thinking of anxiety is going to push to not notice any progress. So I did feel anxious when I did that. So therefore, it wasn't what I wanted. But you as the parent may observe, yeah, but you did it. And a month ago, you couldn't do it. So it was scary, but you did it. And that's progress, right? Or I noticed that you seem to relax a lot faster. That you were still really nervous when we started, but it seemed like this time, you just got into it a lot better, right? So kind of helping them recognize where they are making progress. And then limiting screen time, especially towards bedtime. And I devoted a slide to this just because um, it's important. So um, I put a little infograph here that talks about screen time recommendations. Now, here's the tough thing with this. Your kids get a lot of screen time at school, right? Like the way that education is going, which computers offer so much educationally, but it means that your kid often sits at a computer for a good part of their school day and may have their homework online also, right? So with this, we kind of have to factor in like, they're getting that screen time and then they also often want to do it recreationally, right? So just try to set some limits or be aware of that. So the earlier you set limits in a child's life, the easier it will be, right? So you guys have elementary school kids, be working on it now. It's not going to be the same limits as when they're a teenager, but I promise you, working on those limits now is going to help you set those limits later that are appropriate for a teenager. This one's really hard, but model what you want. So no phones at the table. Keep your devices in one spot when doing other activities. Put your phone down when you're having a conversation, right? And it's sad how hard this is, but it's hard, right? And we all recognize the struggle. Set a smart device curfew, an hour before bedtime or whatever it is. Devices go off, TV goes off. We're going to do other activities. We're going to do our bedtime routines. We're going to start letting our brains and our eyes and all of that get where they need to be for sleep time. No screens in the bedroom. I highly recommend for yourself and your kids. You don't have TVs or computers in bedrooms. Make the bedroom the quiet space. We sleep there, we get privacy there. It's kind of a chill spot, but it's not a spot for gaming or watching our favorite shows or, chatting with your friends. Okay, sure, but I really encourage people to leave the screens out of the bedrooms and then have frequent breaks from screens throughout the day. Again, your child probably spent a substantial amount of time on a screen at school. Their eyes need a break. Their body needs a break, right? So it might mean setting timers and just like, okay, it's the, I know you have more time to watch that show, but you can pause it now. We're gonna go do our break, or we're gonna time it so we have dinner in the middle of some stuff or something like that. And, here's the thing, we know this, but increased screen time is linked to poor behavioral and mental health outcomes, higher rates of anxiety and depression, and worse sleep quality. And I would encourage you to, if you if you really research screen time stuff for adults, you might change some of your habits too, which wouldn't be a bad thing. So okay, lastly, I have some resources here, and hopefully these links will work when you receive the PowerPoint, but you can see the organizations and the general websites on there. This is just a starting point, and I really do mean that. Most of these websites also offer, resource pages of other places that they recommend. There are just a lot of really good resources out there, so feel free to use them. But and a lot of these organizations like Coping Cat Parents, Worry Wise Kids, and Kids Health, those have here's the parent section, here's the kids section. So it, kind of gives you a lot of good information on both ends. So, and then I included this infographic that I found through NASP, which is how caregivers can foster resiliency. It is on their website, but you can kind of look through that too. It just kind of gives, even if your child doesn't necessarily have anxiety, these are just really great things for them to learn. And you'll notice it talks about a lot of the stuff that we talked about. So, all right. So I thank you all for coming tonight and listening. I do have a list of questions that I'm going to go through, and I hope to be specific enough in answering them, but also general enough to make it useful for everyone. And then after I've finished those, I believe that's when we'll have some other open and QA. So thank you for going through with those. So first question I have here, this parent submitted, my daughter is 9. She has ADHD. She is always anxious about going to school and leaving me. So this kind of brings up the question, is this more on the minor side? Is this she's anxious, but she makes it to school? She stays at school. She gets through school. We just have rough morning. In which case, maybe the answer is make up some morning routines, some rituals. It might be a little goodbye thing that we do together, or we say a little comforting phrase as I drop her off. We talk about the school schedule. We talk about when we're going to see each other again. We just try to be predictable with it, right? And then to also be predictable about saying, I know you feel anxious in the mornings, but I know that your teacher says that usually by 8:30, you're doing pretty well, something along those lines, right? Talk about breaks in routine, right? So if you're going to have something different that day, kind of prep it a little bit, say, I know you don't like it this way, but it's just for today. Grandma's going to pick you up, and then I'll see you at 4:30 or that type of thing. If ADHD is making school more difficult, like being able to focus or doing schoolwork, I mean, that could increase anxiety, right? I don't like to go to school because it's really hard for me. So, are there some interventions that are needed? Is there, some problem solving that just needs to happen? Because if school's a little more enjoyable, maybe some of that anxiety will go down, right? Also, validating emotions, saying, I know it's hard for you, but then pointing to the reality of the need for school and strengths. So saying, I know this is hard for you, but school is important and I know you're safe there. Remember that yesterday was hard, but you did a great job and you had so much fun in gym class. So you're saying, I get where you're coming from. I'm not telling you to just suck it up, but we got to look at what you need to do. If it's very disruptive to school, the child won't go or they can't stay at school or they can't stay in class. That's where you need to seek those professional interventions, right? So is it counselors, support staff, maybe an IEP or a 504 plan, maybe taking your child to see a therapist outside of school, and then also maybe looking at some of that ADHD too. So again, looking at the scale may determine what interventions you would take. Um, this person asked how to support children with anxiety in public places. So, one thing I would say is talk about expectations and safety before you go, because this is going to vary a lot, right? So, for example, if I've got a 5-year-old at Disney World, I want them by my side, right? We're going to talk about you got to stay with mom all the time. And I'm going to stress that. But then we're going to talk about, what other things. But if I've got a 10-year-old in the grocery store, you know, I'm going to talk about safety with them, but I'm also going to encourage them to do safe things that build up their independence, build up their confidence. So one thing we do is just talk about what we're going to do if we get split up. If you can't find me or I can't find you, here's our meeting spot or here's what we do, right? So that's kind of on the problem solving side, right? If the worst case happens, we already have a way to deal with it. Um, but I also want to do some of that gentle exposure, right? So let's say it's a 10-year-old, and they do not want to leave my side in the grocery store. I might be like, okay, I'm going to be in this aisle and you're going to go to the next aisle and grab the mac and cheese and come right back here. Okay. And we're just going to work on some little things like that. And we're going to practice that. And then maybe we can work up a little bit from there. Maybe we can go to the gas station and I wait by the checkout and they go pick out their favorite candy bar, and bring it to me. Or we just kind of like build age appropriate blocks onto that, right? And sometimes you have to do something over and over and over again until that sort of gets a little bit boring and easier. And then you can push it up a little step, right? So, public places, again, they're tricky because we know there are safety concerns. We want to teach our children the right, uh, what is a real threat versus I'm scared, right? And that might even be you're out in the public place and your child is very scared. And, you say to them, tell me what you're worried about right now. And you can kind of address it, right? Maybe they just saw a shooting on the news last night. And so they're freaking out because they think a shooter's going to come in. You might have to have a conversation about it, right? This person said, what tools, manipulatives, or toys are really helpful for children with anxiety? So, if we're talking about non physical tools, calm breathing, relaxation skills, positive distractions, learning to test and improve your thoughts, like we talked about, problem solving skills, gentle exposure, like I was just explaining, and social skills, right? If we're talking about physical things, could be some fidget toys, something to touch or something to look at, a worry stone or a small comfort item, something they could keep in their pocket and they could just rub it and maybe even have a phrase in their head that you guys have come up with, like, I touch the rock or I touch this and I tell myself this. And then also anything that encourages large body movements or physical activity is actually really good for reducing some of that stress. And then music is a good one too. Um, would you recommend any type of therapy for children with anxieties to support them long term? I hit up on CBT. Like I said, there are many other things, but you're looking at CBT, exposure, problem solving skills, coping skills, learning to manage their thoughts. These are kind of those big ones, right? How can we support the child to open up in school and group settings? So, first, I would say assess the environment, right? Are we trying to get kids to open up in an environment that maybe isn't conducive to that or doesn't feel emotionally safe? Um, so we would want to make sharing optional and kind of keep it at a level that's appropriate for the moment. Um, so we don't want kids to share their biggest struggles in the middle of math class, right? That's just not the place for it. Those strong emotional things should be saved for small groups that have a mental health professional guiding all of it, right? But if we're trying to, get kids to interact, get kids to answer questions that aren't quite so, deep and personal, activity based, get them doing things together because same with adults, right? Think of team building exercises, right? You get us all doing a common goal or working together, it fosters conversation and then you can process what happened, right? And that goes a lot further than just telling people to sit around and talk about something. Um, should we say he's shy? And if not, what do we say? So I would say this depends on the situation. If you know your kid is really overwhelmed and needs people to back off, You can be that buffer and just say something like that. Um, or maybe talk with your kid about how you'd like to say it when they're in public. Maybe they hate if you call them shy, but if you word it a different way, they're not so upset with it. But here's the other thing. If you're trying to work on social skills and exposure, then use your discretion, right? The situation matters, but try not to protect them from things that are not really unsafe. You want to encourage them to also be able to determine, I'm uncomfortable, but this is actually okay, versus I'm uncomfortable and this is not okay. And yes, my parent should intervene and help me out with it. So, and then also remember, people do pick up on kids' shyness, right? So, yeah, there are those people who seem a little bit oblivious, but most adults kind of recognize or respond when a kid is a little bit more back off. But I think it is easy for us to jump in and protect the kid when they don't actually need protecting. And that's kind of pushing this whole idea of not having them engage, not building those social skills, and not being allowed to be uncomfortable while still knowing that it's okay. Um, Question about the child with anxiety throughout the school day. There's much expected of our grade school children. Along with academia, there is social aspect. What can I do to help promote a less stressful kid while they're at school and with their classmates? Teachers have so much on their plates that when it comes to emotions, feelings, and anxieties of students, sometimes it's when the child finally gets home to unload all their fears of the day, you realize they are expected so much, sometimes too much. Yes. So school days can be rough. We all want to decompress after a tough day of work, right? So maybe build in some decompression time. Teach your child some healthy routines. Let them learn the best ways to take care of themselves. They need your guidance, they need your structure with it. But if you teach them these patterns now, they'll be able to carry that on into adulthood. So don't make the screen time. Don't make it come home from school and just veg out. Pick some other stuff. Maybe we find a healthy snack. We take a walk together. We talk about our day. We read a favorite book, do something like that. We problem solve about whatever's stressing them out at school. Maybe something needs to change. Maybe they need to try something different. There may be a time where you need to talk to a teacher, sort something out, right? Validate the emotions they're having. Ask before intervening, unless it's a serious situation, right? They might complain to you about another student. If that student isn't being, a real threat, you might ask the kid, like, do you want me to talk to your teacher? They might be like, no, I do not. I'm going to handle it. You could talk about ways to handle it, or there are those times where you are going to step in, right? And then if you have any helpful feedback for a teacher, and I say this cautiously, right? Teachers get lots of feedback and they're working very hard, but you might recognize something where you're like, you know what, he seems to do a lot better when this happens. If you could offer him that more often, or, it seems like when he sits up in the front corner, he just gets his work done better, something like that. Okay. Question about when anxiety hits when turning off screens, even when timers set or reminders for 5 more minutes. How can I best navigate my child to overcome that anxious feeling of having to turn off the screen and transition to the next activity without those bubbling up feelings of panic and stress? So, my first question is, what's bringing up the anxiety? And they may not be able to articulate this, so it may take some detective work, right? But what's the thought? What are the thoughts that are so upsetting to this kid when screen time ends? Um, and is anxiety sort of their default stress emotion, right? Is it just like, now I have to face all these things in my life and I didn't want to face them, right? Then building skills to manage anxiety is going to be helpful for this. Also, having a plan for transition. So when the screen goes off, you have 5 minutes of a chosen decompression activity or relaxation activity. Maybe it's listening but not watching your favorite song. Maybe it's drawing or coloring. It could be playing with a pet. It could be jumping on the trampoline, read a short story, something like that, right? But it's like, okay, maybe we build in that relaxation piece, but we need to stop screen time, right? We need to move on to the next activity. Um, again, if it seems just really, really intense and you've been trying stuff at home, you might need to talk to a professional about some ideas. How can my spouse and I prevent our anxieties from rubbing off on our child? Get your own help. And I mean that in the best way possible because you know that the healthier you are, the more you naturally show your child what to do, right? So therapy is your friend too. So don't lie to your kid when you're anxious, but kind of like how I talked about at the very beginning, share it at an appropriate level and then maybe demonstrating how you're helping yourself. So you could say, Mom's worried about work tomorrow. I think I need to go for a walk to clear my head. Do you want to come? Or I know I just snapped at you and that wasn't fair. I'm sorry. I was thinking about something that made me worried. I'm going to go take a little break before I make dinner so I'll feel better. Stuff like that, right? Because we know active parents have active kids, right? We see it all the time with physical health, right? Well, parents that are emotionally healthy, they tend to raise emotionally healthy kids. So yeah, we got to do our own work on this. When you're practicing, practice the stuff with your kids, you will benefit. All this stuff that I teach to my students, I'm like, oh, I need to do that too. Better sleep schedule. Yeah, I need that in my life. Better eating habits. I need that one too, right? How can I help my child cope with their anxiety without downplaying their feelings? So, feelings are real, but they aren't always the best measure of reality. So I often use a scale with kids. So we'll talk about like the situation was probably like a 2 on the worry scale, but they reacted like it was a 7. So let's look at why it was such a difference. And it's usually the thoughts in their head, right? Remind them that it's no fun to have feelings make choices for them. And so that learning to manage your feelings is a really good thing. And then keep establishing the difference between a perceived threat and a real threat with anxiety, right? So I feel like that person was going to hurt me when you're looking at the situation, you're like, no, there weren't any signs of that, right? Versus, no, this is an actual threatening situation and we need to just deal with that and get safe, right? Um, that big dog was barking at me, but it was behind a very large fence and clearly didn't have access to me versus I'm on the street right now and that dog is running around and I think I need to go somewhere, right? Um, so, kind of helping them. This involves, you're not teaching them not to worry. You're trying to teach them to appropriately worry and appropriately respond, right? So, and then use their coping skills, right? I don't use relaxed breathing when I need to run away, right? Like, forget that I need to run away. But in a situation where I don't need to run away, I might use my relaxed breathing. All right, last one here that I have. My child has a large anxiety about being a bad kid. We've never called him this. When he is spiraling with this negative self talk, is there a way I can get him out of this? So, negative self-talk, right? We've hit on it multiple times. So examining those thoughts for truth and then modifying them to be true and helpful. So let's look at what's going on in your head right now. How true is this? Would you say the same thing to your best friend in that situation, right? When mom and dad mess up, are we bad parents? Right? What's another way we can think about this? So I'm a bad kid might be altered to sometimes I do bad things. Everybody does. What matters is what I choose to do next, right? So we're not saying I'm the greatest kid in the world. I never mess up. But hey, everybody messes up. It's a part of life. But what the biggest thing is, how am I going to respond to that, right? So sometimes focusing on the calming coping skills will also help those thoughts to just go down, right? So it might even be like, I know the thoughts are really wild right now. Let's just practice breathing, or let's go do this walk, or let's go listen to this music and see if that kind of helps calm things down also. So those are all the questions that I have for then. I know this has gone on a while. Like I said, I hope that's all been beneficial. And then I will turn it back over to Melanie.